Is my neighbor? That's the central question we all struggle with all our lives, isn't it? That's the main question. But don't answer it too quickly. Because I know we've been to Sunday school and we tend to want to answer that question, well, my neighbor's anyone, my neighbor's everyone. But if we answer that question that quickly, we miss the radical nature of the way that Jesus answered that question. Because my neighbor is not anyone. My neighbor is not everyone. My neighbor has a name. My neighbor has a face. My neighbor has a story. Now, when he was asked, who is my neighbor, Jesus told one of the most beloved parables, the parable of the Good Samaritan. He told a story. In trying to answer that question for myself, I also have a story. And this is it. In the late summer of 2010, you may recall that a certain pastor in Florida decided that he was going to observe the anniversary of 9/11 by burning a Koran in the front yard of his misnamed church, Dove World Outreach Center. And if you recall, it caused a furor around the world. Egypt passed a death sentence for him, and people in the Middle East were upset, and the U.S. State Department was concerned, and it was a big media event for several weeks. And I remember my feelings. I remember being so frustrated and outraged myself, thinking, why, it's so embarrassing to me as a Christian. I wanted so desperately to do something. I really wanted to protest. I wanted to go march in front of this guy's house. I wanted to do something, but I live in Texas, not Florida. And it occurred to me to ask a different question. That question is, who is my neighbor? Because I realized as I drove around my neighborhood that the Islamic Association of Collin County was just a few blocks from where I live. I realized that they were literally my neighbors, and I didn't know any of them. So I put a call into the leader of that mosque, and I told him on voicemail, I believe, that I just wanted to reach out and say that I was very sorry that this so-called pastor was doing this sort of thing. And the imam of that mosque called me back and immediately invited me to lunch. And that's begun a friendly relationship with the Imam Yasin Sheikh, a man who was born in the UK of Indian descent. He loves English football. He loves Mediterranean food. He's married. His wife just gave birth to twin daughters. And we discovered that we had a lot in common. I discovered that imams and pastors have a lot in common. We have some of the same struggles and some of the same issues in trying to lead a congregation. We both complained about attendance. Both complained about finances. Both complained about people who led our boards and committees. But I also heard Yasin voice another frustration that really concerned me. He was concerned about the state of Islam in America and the growing hatred, the growing intolerance. He told me, he said, Wes, I can't tell you how many times I am asked by an American Christian, why don't you imams make some sort of statement against terrorism? He said, Wes, we do it all the time, but the media never covers it. He said, and besides, how many times have I asked you to apologize for Westboro Baptist Church and their actions? And so, burdened by this thought, I decided to do something different. I decided to take another step in reaching out to my neighbor. It's not just enough to know our neighbor's name or to know our neighbor's face. I feel like in order for us to really love our neighbor, we need to enter into their story. We need to enter their narrative so we can truly understand their sense of religious devotion. So I got the idea that perhaps I would try to observe Ramadan with Yasin. So I went to his office a couple weeks before Ramadan started, and I said, I'm thinking about observing Ramadan. Can you tell me a little bit about what it's like? First, he laughed at me and said, you're crazy. I said, I know, but I'm just interested. Tell me what's involved. And he told me, well, Ramadan is a fast. It's a 30-day fast. Every day of that 30 days, from dawn to dusk, during the daylight hours, you are to take no food, no drink, no sex for 30 days. But he said, but it's not just a fast of the body. It's also a fast of the heart. It's a fast of the eyes. It's a fast of the feet. It's a fast of the mind. He says the whole goal is to put oneself in a place of complete dependence and obedience upon God. And I thought, I'd like to try that. And he explained to me that the word Islam itself means simply submission. That the whole goal of Islamic faith and practice is to put oneself in a complete state of dependence and obedience upon God. And all I could think was Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane saying, not my will, but yours. So I told him I was going to try it. And so the first day of Ramadan, I woke up at 4:15 in the morning, and I crammed as much eggs and oatmeal and milk and water as I could before that magic time of 4:47 when I could have nothing else. And it was a long day. It wasn't until 8:37 that evening that I could break the fast. But I found, remarkably, that I could do it. I found that fasting from the food was actually the easy part, that fasting from drink was difficult because, for one thing, Ramadan in 2012 occurred from mid-July to mid-August. And in North Texas, this means temperatures over 100 every day. And I found that I was always parched, always dry, always this sense of, I just want something to drink, And I also found that the act of physical deprivation caused something interesting. It gave me a sort of a little, what I called a permanent buzz in my head. Not really a headache, but just this sense deep down in the middle of my cranium somewhere that, something was off. And it just felt like this little buzzing. And I decided that that was my call to prayer. And every time when I paused and I heard the buzz in my head, I stopped and I reminded myself that I was in the presence of God. And it really reawakened in me the sense of what Brother Lawrence called practicing the presence of God. We understand intellectually that we're always in God's presence, but we don't always acknowledge it. We don't always live as if we are. And I found the practice of fasting and that feeling of the buzz helped me to practice the presence of God. Now, I also had decided that I would blog about my experience. I blog pretty regularly on newmethofesto.com. And so I began a blog almost every day, blogging about what I was experiencing, about what I was feeling, what it was like. And during that first week of Ramadan, I noticed that the Huffington Post was also doing a live blog, and they were asking for submissions. And so I sent them a quick email, told them what I was doing about my blog, and they linked to it. And they included a portion of my blog. And all of a sudden, my blog started to get hits, lots of hits. And all of a sudden, I was getting hits. I think at the height of Ramadan, I was getting over 5,000 hits a day on my blog, which is incredibly more than I normally got. But the most interesting thing about the blog is that when I looked at the analytics, I discovered that most of the hits were coming from overseas. They were coming from places like the Middle East, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, coming from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And then people started to respond in the comment section on my blog, and I got amazing, incredible comments. People saying, I've never heard of a Christian pastor wanting to learn anything about Islam. I can't believe you're doing this. It's so wonderful. Thank you for doing this. My very favorite comment came, and I remember the first couple lines. It just said, Salam from the tiny island of Sri Lanka. Dear Pastor, you may have never guessed that you would bring a tear to the eyes of a young woman living miles and seas away for your humble and gracious act. Oh, man, it was incredible. I was really, really blown away by that recognition, by that understanding, that encouragement that I received. And the blog just continued to grow and continued to be a source of amazing conversation between Muslims from all over the world. Now, I also had a chance to share the story with Yassine on radio. There was a TV news report about what we were doing. I continue to get incredible messages of what I'm wearing. I received in the mail one day a package from someone I did not know, and he explained that this was a Pakistani traditional clothing for men called the shalwar kameez, and he asked me to put it on, take a picture, and put it on my blog. So I did. I have no idea who sent it to me. I have no idea who this person is. Another interesting thing happened. I got a comment. I happened to write a blog in which I commented that it was very difficult to fast when you were the only one fasting. I was the only one fasting in my house, obviously, and so I could not eat dinner until a couple hours after the rest of the family. And I commented how difficult it was to explain to other people what I was doing or why. And a man named Osman, who is a student at University of North Texas, wrote in the comment to that particular blog, he said, "Yes, but you have to understand that for Muslims, we don't fast individually. We're fasting as a community. And the importance of what we're doing is the fact that we're all doing it together. And, in fact, the most joyful part of Ramadan is breaking our fast together. So would you come and break fast with us?" So he invited me to his mosque, which was just up the road from where I lived, and I participated in iftar, breaking of the fast. And when I commented on that, then it seemed every mosque in the Dallas-Fort Worth area invited me. And I had some of the best meals. I had people warning me that if I was not careful, I would gain weight during the month of Ramadan because of the incredible feast and iftars that happen in the evening. Now, the thing I learned that saddened me the most was that I began to realize the reason that I was getting such an incredible response from Muslims was because they were desperate to hear a word of encouragement, of recognition, of acknowledgement from their fellow Americans, from their neighbors. They were desperate for it. So just the news of one single person reaching out was something that they wanted to embrace, that they wanted to cling to. Now, I wish that this story ended like this, that had a happy, feel-good, interfaith dialogue, Muslim-Christian relationship, that it was a happy ending. However, 2012 saw an incredible increase and upsurge in violence committed on Muslims and Muslim properties in the United States. In fact, just during the 30 days of Ramadan, there were 7 different Muslim mosques or cemeteries attacked or vandalized during that period. 7. A mosque in Joplin, Missouri was completely burned to the ground. A gunman walked into a Sikh temple thinking he was walking into a mosque and shot it up. Now, I'd also like to suggest and be able to say to you that at least the Christian community was different. Even my own particular community was different, but it wasn't. And I had people in my own congregation who were outraged by what I was doing. Now, of course, I heard comments. There were wackos. There were people who I heard people say to me, "But don't you know the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to take over America?" I heard, "But don't you know Barack Obama is a Muslim?" And I was saddened, and as I began to realize that some Christians allow Fox News to tell them who their neighbor is and how to love them. But there were also even more serious problems. People in my congregation who walked by me in the halls and didn't really want to look at me. There were some secret meetings. There were lots of letters to the bishop, lots of letters to the district superintendent. And I have to say it became a great strain on me, especially as Ramadan wore on. The last week of Ramadan is a very special one for Muslims because they believe that sometime during one of those nights in the last week of Ramadan is the night in which the angel Gabriel gave to the Prophet Muhammad the Quran, the complete Quran. And so Muslims believe that one of the nights in that last week is what they call the night of power, a night in which God will bless you or give you some power in a special way. And so many Muslims will spend the whole week living and sleeping inside the mosque, waiting for their night of power. One of those nights was one of the lowest that I had, and I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and I turned. And about 1:30, I gave up, and I got up, and I walked around the house trying to figure out what to do. And finally, I threw on my jeans, and I got in my car, and I thought, the one place I knew I might receive a kind word was the mosque. So I drove down to the mosque, and sure enough, the parking lot was full. I walked into the prayer room full of men listening to a sermon by a guest imam who was preaching on the blessedness of heaven. And I sat in the room, and I looked around at all the faces. From time to time, a man would look at me and nod, recognizing me. And when the sermon was finished, we all got up to walk out to the gymnasium to get snacks. And a man came up and said, "Reverend, we're so glad you're here. So good to see you. I'm surprised, but wow." And he grabbed my arm and he walked with me. And he had his 5-year-old, and we broke bread together. And as I drove home that night, feeling saved and delivered by truly an act of radical hospitality, I remembered the parable of the Good Samaritan again. And I remembered that the man who showed neighborly hospitality was the other, was the stranger, was the foreigner, was a person of another faith tradition. I thought I had been the one looking to be a neighbor to someone, and it suddenly occurred to me that I had been the one beaten up, lying on the road, battered and bruised. Thank you.